As early as educators, we are bound and we are dependent on the curriculum, and we are dependent on having a clear sense of what we want children to know, and developing their knowledge, skills, behaviours and so on. Storytelling is an incredibly effective and powerful means of delivering that curriculum, because it provides a view into a world outside the immediate. It provides an incredible platform for exploring ideas, exploring emotions, exploring behaviours, and engaging with knowledge. And because storytelling is intrinsically engaging for young children, it makes that process of curriculum delivery even easier and even more straightforward. For example, one of our key domains is supporting children's physical development. And although much of that is gross motor and sort of vigorous physical activity, there's also an important element of developing their fine motor skills, their precise movements. So with books, you have again an incredibly appropriate and engaging platform with which to do that. So things like page turning, things like pointing to pictures, things like visual discrimination in finding things in pictures, they all enhance and support children's physical development in a really natural, contextualised way. So one of the key elements which we want for children, one of the key aspects of the curriculum, is children's personal, social and emotional development, their ability to engage with others, their ability to feel empathy, their ability to manage emotions and so on. What storytelling does is it provides a vicarious context for that by identifying with characters and exploring the motivations or behaviour or decisions of characters. We are immediately connecting children in a very realistic way to their own selves and their own behaviours and their own decisions. Because it's happening outside of them, because it's happening to somebody else and they can view it externally, it gives them a greater sense of safety and security to understand it and to process it. Because storytelling is such a natural, intrinsic part of being human, and because we rely on stories to make sense of the world, to understand the incomprehensible, to know the unknowable, to find solutions for things which are really challenging, it naturally fits into all aspects of the curriculum. So things like mathematical development exist intrinsically within stories. Even when it's not explicit, children are picking up on mathematical language, looking at numbers of objects, shapes of objects, measurements, relative size of objects and so on. And so all that feeds in through the medium of story, it feeds into children's consciousness and supports the more direct, explicit teaching that goes on. One of the other elements of the curriculum which is really critical and important is giving children a wider view of the world they live in, both in terms of their immediate community, but also beyond that into other cultures, other climates, other countries. So stories provide children with a means of doing that because it gives them a context in terms of plot and in terms of characters. But the environment or the place in which it happens or the time in which it happens might be very different. So again, those ideas and that understanding of difference and that understanding of a world beyond their own experience is provided for them in a way that makes real sense to them. So in early years, most stories have illustrations. They tend not to be just text. So they're enlivened with images and pictures and so on. And I think one of the things that does is give children a real sense of the link between language, story and artistic expression. So sometimes they might interpret pictures slightly differently, or they might see perceptions of images in a slightly different way. And when it links to the story, that fires and fuels and triggers their imagination. So a lot of good teaching is all about how you model, how you show children what's possible. And by giving them high quality text with high quality stories, you're giving them the possibility of how worlds can unfold, how stories can become what they are. But also with the illustrations and the context of that, you're showing children what's possible in terms of their own capacity as artists. The role of parents is acknowledged to be absolutely critical in children's development. The home learning environment and their parents as their first educators has long been established and recognised as a key element of children's development. So in ensuring that parents understand the value of stories and the impact of stories and the necessity to share stories with children, particularly for children to be read to, is really, really important. I think with the emphasis on phonics and decoding, which is as it should be, sometimes the focus on the nature and purpose of stories, sometimes there's a danger of getting lost. And I think sometimes there can be assumption that once children can decode simple words, then they can read to themselves. But actually, we have a responsibility to continue reading to them above and beyond their actual level of technical interpretation, because it gives them the possibility of what they can aspire to. It also strengthens their language, strengthens their understanding. So for parents, it's really important to stress that the nature of storytelling, but also the importance of making sure children are read to regularly as often as possible. Someone once said to me, you should read to your children as long as you can get away with it, because actually being read to is not just a comforting thing, but for young children who are still on that path of literacy, it gives them an aspiration of where they can get to. There's lots of different strategies that schools and teachers use to support parents. One of those is to model how to read a story themselves, and to show how you can really get beneath the surface of a story by asking the right kinds of questions, getting the children to ask questions, getting them to recall things, getting them to understand how this relates to other stories they know, or to connect that with experiences themselves. And encouraging parents to make time for stories, particularly, bedtime is the obvious one, to make time for story, and for children to choose those stories themselves, to choose favourite ones, but also to be introduced to new ones. One of the things that often happens is children choose the same story over and over again, and parents often, and teachers sometimes want to get around that, but actually that's a really important part of the process of learning. By being read familiar stories that are predictable, where children know what's going to happen, they start to align the text and the print, but they also start to get that familiarity of how plots evolve. By knowing what the plot is, they start to see the structure and the content and the colour, if you like, within that. So it's really important to respect children's choices in terms of their stories, and to make regular time so that it becomes a key part of their daily routine and their daily expectation. Being an early years teacher, a reception year 1 teacher, is highly pressured. There are huge demands on your time. There are huge demands on the expectations and the level of progression and development that children need to make or expected to make. And sometimes there can be inadvertently a tendency to squeeze out the opportunity for stories. Now, that we need to be really wary of that and resist it, because my view is you can't afford not to read children's stories. The impact it has on their learning, their cognition, their emotional development and so on is so immense that by taking that out, you are reducing the impact of your teaching on those children. So we start with the principle that stories are really important, and as a rough measure, children should have at least 5 stories every day in a school-based setting. Now, sometimes those will be at the end of the day, sometimes those will be in the middle of the day. It might be at the beginning of the day when you're introducing a theme or a project or a particular concept. You might do that through a story, or possibly even through a non-fiction book. But to have a sense of engaging with print, engaging with the process of storytelling as part of the rhythm of the day is really powerful in supporting children's learning. So it's about making the time for it, and it's about prioritising that by understanding the importance of the impact that it has.